Hello everyone and welcome back to Let's Play Ys 1. In the last part, we started our descent into the mines after finishing some stuff up back at the shrine, but we got a Rototree seed in there to start. Someone was looking for that over here at the bar, so let's go give it to him. Hey Adol, I finally went home and gave that ring to my wife. Thank you again for saving my life.
Holy, is that a Rototree seed? Please, can I just have a small piece? I just want to sample it.
Actually, you know what? Never you mind, I'm gonna hold myself back. I'm a little worried that if I try it, I'll grow a taste for it, and normal food will never sate my hunger again. It's just good to know that it's real. Maybe someday I'll find one myself, and by then, I'll be ready. So our actual use for the Rototree seed isn't to give it to him, it's to eat it ourselves. Adol peeled away the hard shell of the seed and ate the pulpy meat inside. The taste was sweet, but mellow. The instant he swallowed, Adol felt a strange shudder run down his back. Now, I forget exactly who, but some NPC in the game hints towards what you can do next now that you've done that. Now that we've eaten the Rototree seed, we want to go to both of the Rototrees scattered across the plains. For better hinting for progression, I'd recommend going to the northwestern Rototree first, but since I know what I want, I'm coming to the southeast one first. Darkness again stirs in the world. It brings another nightmare to Ys. O swordsman, thy journey begins now. The silver light beckons both hope and destruction. Lose not thy way, lose not thy will. Leave thy heart open to the possibilities. Silver light began to spill out from the roots of the great tree. And we get the silver sword. The silver equipment is required in order to finish the game, by the way, so make sure, you grab it all. Or at least the silver sword is. I think technically the shield and armor are optional in some versions, but it's just better to get it just to prevent yourself any headache down the line. And also, I should note, just getting the Rototree seed and eating it isn't enough to talk to the trees. You'd also need to have Reah play her harmonica like we saw last time. Because that will make the trees wake up, so to speak, and be a little more receptive to conversation. Also, something I should note, I already mentioned that later versions of the game are where Barbados Port was added, so they added the entire section south of Manea there. The plains themselves have also seen several redesigns over the years. Namely, in the earlier versions of the game prior to the versions that had Barbados Port, the plains were largely coastal on the west side of them. This entire section here with the second Rototree basically didn't exist. You understand our words. My name is Rhoda. I am one of the twin trees born of the goddesses in the time of Ys. My leaves have felt the joyous timber. That melody can awaken even the forest itself. It brings back so many memories. And that's them putting a lampshade in the fact that Reah technically woke them up with her harmonica somehow. Also, can you tell those FMV cutscenes like that were added in later releases, particularly I think the PSP version based off their aspect ratio? I actively have to zoom in on them. With my current 4:3 aspect ratio for them to fill the entire screen, because otherwise it just feels weirdly empty. For now, though, we've done our business in the plains again, so now it's time for us to dive once again back into the mines, and in a lot of other games I would actually jump cut back to where we last left off in here. But just so you can figure out exactly where we're going, we're just gonna run straight through it all. It doesn't take that long. By and large, because of how Ys 1's combat is, let alone Ys 2's, the dungeons aren't usually that long. I think the longest dungeon between the first two games is probably... The final dungeon of this one technically gets up there, but I think it's probably like the entirety of the end game of Ys 2 just because of how big that entire section is. Though the final dungeon at the end of Bump Combat Ys 4 on the, I think it was the PC engine, was also really long, as I think I mentioned already in this LP. The second basement floor here is the final floor of the mines, but it's also the most dangerous, mostly for one enemy type in specific, not the Lemondis or the Chalaskins. There's a third enemy type here whose name I forget that looks like a knight, and the humanoid enemies as rare as they are probably the most threatening towards endgame because they usually have some pretty high attack, but also have some high defense if you're not at certain levels. I have had times where I'm only about level 8 at this point in the game, and they do a lot more damage, but because of me going for maxing out my bestiary as soon as I can, I'm already level 10, so there's not much to fear around here. Not much, at the least. Mind you, I say that, if there's a time to grind up to level 10, if you aren't already, it is now, because I don't really recommend going into the boss fight at level 9 or anything below that, as I'd argue the boss that's coming up is the hardest boss in the game on the whole. For now, though, I have done the bestiary grinding. We got everything here. We got the Chelaskins, Lemondis, and Breals all maxed out. So now I can grab this chest, which is, I believe, another heal potion, and then move on. I do find it kind of funny how the Rhoda tree basically said that our journey has begun, which I guess is technically true for Adel on a macro scale, because this is game 1 of technically, like, what, 12? 13 total, counting remakes. But at this point, by the time you see that dialogue, you're more than likely already over 3/4 or getting close to 3/4 done with the game to begin with, so it just feels like a weird place to put that dialogue. So at this point, I recommend, if you somehow miss certain things, like getting a heal potion, missing the shield ring earlier in the game somehow, or just outright ignoring it, that you go and fix that right now, because beyond this door is said boss fight. And as you can tell, I'm really preparing myself because I hate this fight. Boss fight here in the mines is Vagullion. Vagullion is a bat. The main attack Vagullion has is to split into smaller bats that will then try to run into you as you run back and forth across the screen. You kind of have to go in sort of a figure 8 mixed with a U motion to get around them reliably, but even then, that's a little rough. The really hard thing about this boss fight, outside of just dodging the amount of bats, especially when they're more spread out, is they're only vulnerable for a split second at any point in time. Whenever they reform, you need to immediately be gunning for them because you can hit them as they reform and then they'll immediately split back up. In earlier versions of Ys 1, this fight is easier because they are vulnerable more often, it feels like. But also just dodging attacks at that point, even with the only 4-directional movement, I think is a little easier. Plus, I think depending on the version, it's very possible to have good enough defense at this point where you can just basically ignore any damage some of these bats do, but that really, again, depends on the version, because they're so similar yet at the same time. Minor numerical differences technically exist because of stuff like that. Heck, I know the damage you can do to bosses in earlier versions of Ys 1 are much more notable. Because I think, technically speaking, the rings don't really affect you as much during boss fights in particular, specifically the power ring. Like, I know in Ys 1 on, like, the PC Engine or the Master System, it's possible to kill the final boss much more quickly, because you drain through their health a lot more quickly in that version. We'll talk about the final boss, though, when we get there, because, there's a lot to say, and there are problems to talk about, especially in the PC release of the game. Mind you, I say that in particular with the final boss. It's present throughout the rest of the game, too. It's just that it becomes very much more apparent with another issue in the final boss. Effectively, what it comes down to is when the game runs at frame rates higher than 60 with like VSync enabled or at higher resolutions, the game starts to get a little futzy with hitboxes and how enemies move. I know I've seen videos of the previous boss fight at the end of the shrine turning at extreme radiuses that I've even never experienced, to the point where you can basically never dodge them. So my base recommendation, run the game at 60 and lock it at 60 in the config menu on the PC version. We'll get into the other issues that causes during the final boss in a couple of parts. Because for now, Vagullion is almost out of here. I'm actually very impressed with my own playing on this particular playthrough, though, because on my first run, I was here for like 40 minutes, somewhere abouts. This was my second attempt at the boss fight. You can tell because I swapped to the timer ring. I'm not sure if the rings actively affect boss fights on the whole on this version. It doesn't feel like they do, but I think it's just my brain thinking it does. But that's our third book of Ys. Before we leave, though, we might as well come up here. It seems as if some kind of statue had been placed here at one time. Interesting. Adel beat on the door, but it sounded like solid rock on the other side. Huh. Interesting. Well, we're done here in the mine. We never need to come back, so let's get the hell out of here and over to Zepik Village, because now that we have that third book of Ys, We can have Jaba read that, and that will actively trigger our next plot node, and we'll be able to progress further into the main story.
One of the villagers reported something most unusual. She said she could hear a mysterious voice mixed in with the winds upon the plain. It was like a whisper. Perhaps the voice belongs to one of the Rhoda, the great twin trees of Asteria. At one time, humans conversed readily with the Rhoda trees merely by eating their seeds. Perhaps if you should find and ingest a Rhoda tree seed yourself, you may have a similar experience.
That's how you're supposed to know to do that. That's right. So I guess technically the order of operations you're supposed to do is have Reah play the harmonica, you come back here and talk to Jaba, and you learn that. Jaba's been teaching me many things since my arrival in Zephyr. Mixing herbs, fortune-telling, the culture and history of Asteria, too. Every day makes me feel complete. All my fears and reservations from my long imprisonment have vanished into thin air. Well, almost all. The truth still petrifies me. Whenever I get particularly scared, though, I just think about when you took my hand and led me to safety. You taught me courage, Adol. Thanks to you, I've been able to look ahead without ever feeling I must also look back. And now let's read that new volume.
So, it was in the abandoned mine, was it? How peculiar.
The Book of Dabby. I speak now of the disaster of Ease. He rose suddenly and attacked our cities. He called forth molten stone from the bowels of the world to burn our fields and trap us in a sea of fire. It was terrible and absolute. One by one, our proud nations were blown out like candles, and darkness and chaos stole over our world. Surely, the Claria was the cause. Was it not the harbinger of darkness? Thus we sealed it within the darkness in the ground, so that hope may shine anew. Forget it not, and never lay hands upon it again. Interesting.
There are 6 books of Ease. The remaining 3 are all hidden within Darm Tower. The Devil's Tower, they call it. It dates back as far as the shrine. If you go there, I recommend you speak with my son, Goban. He should be able to show you the way in. You are an accomplished swordsman. Indeed, you are the hero that Sarah foresaw. The legendary brave soul. I commend you for coming so far. I'm certain that you will be all right, even in the Devil's Tower.
I don't really know if any of this means anything to you. I won't ask you not to go, but just promise me one thing. Come back safely, so that I may see you again. So now we have the A-OK to finally go to Darm Tower. It's only been, featured in the opening heavily and seen in the distance for most of the game in some form. So we'll learn exactly why in a few moments, but to go slightly ahead of ourselves, going into Darm Tower itself is a point of no return. Once you're in there for the rest of the campaign. So if there's anything you want to still do here in the main part of Asteria, grind up some money, get some levels you're missing somehow, buy leftover equipment, even minor achievement stuff, do that now.
My mother told me everything. In order to find the remaining books of Ease, you have to enter the tower. Since the day the Stormwall first showed up, the tower's been teeming with demonic sentries. Our band of thieves tried to get things under control in there, but suffered heavy casualties. They were too strong, too many. We had no choice but to fall back. My right-hand man, Dogi, has also gone missing. He's in there, but I can't even say if he's still alive. Darm Tower is an unbelievably dangerous place, if you haven't gotten that already. It's most definitely not for the faint of heart. If you've truly mastered the silver equipment, the sword especially, then you might just stand a chance. Very well, I'll open the gate for you.
So what he effectively just said is that you're not able to enter Darm Tower without at the least the silver sword. I'd recommend getting the silver shield and armor as well, but if you don't grab them now, I do believe there are chests that have copies of them in Darm Tower all the same. So as for what you should have before going into Darm Tower, if you're going for 100%, you should have all but the final 2 entries in the character notes screen. And for the enemies, you should have the complete notes for the first page and a half and the first 4 boss fights. This does mean that the remaining enemies are all located within Darm Tower, which is a lot, yes, but Darm Tower is also the longest dungeon in the game, far and away, as it's where the rest of Ease 1 takes place.
This door is one way only. Once you're inside, you won't be able to get back out. It's also completely soundproof, so if you scream for dear life, it ain't gonna wake us from our naps. I'd say at most you should be limited to 1 day in there. Make sure you're back here tomorrow morning, with or without the Books of Ease. I'll reopen the door to let you out when the sun rises. Alright, get going. And try not to get yourself killed in there. Hold it! Just so you know, that wing you're carrying... Well, Darm Tower is encased in a powerful magical barrier. If you try to use the wing, you'll just get sucked into the tower walls. You'll be killed instantly. I'd better hold on to it for you, so there aren't any unfortunate accidents. Oh, thanks for the warning. Ooh, that could have gone badly. And now for arguably the most iconic set of songs in the game, because you're hearing them for a while. It helps that also a majority of E's Origin soundtrack is composed of these songs for other reasons. Also, in the case you think the cutscene where he warns you about the wing seems kind of out of place, there is sort of a reason for that. By and large, the way a lot of important NPC houses were treated in the earlier games was that they were more of like just a shop screen that had dialogue, and Goban's desk was one of those such cases, rather than just being actual houses you could explore. Also, something I haven't mentioned yet, I almost LP'd the PC Engine version of the game, the TurboGrafx 16 version, which by and large uses the same sound and visual design as Dragon Slayer Legend of Heroes, the first Legend of Heroes game that I LP'd about a year ago at this point. Something I should note is that that still has voice acting, but I'd say out of all of the games in the PC Engine like that, it had probably the best quality voice acting in terms of like performance level. So right there, I got the Evil Ring. If you're playing along, do not equip that. It is an instant kill at the moment. Do not do so. This chest is empty. If memory serves, that chest contains a copy of the Talwar sword, in the case you hadn't found one yet. That might seem a little odd, but there is a reason for it we'll talk about down the line. The thing about Darm Tower is that it is deliberately very windy and very samey looking. You are climbing up 25 different floors of it, and anytime you encounter even just a visual staircase on an individual floor, you will climb up to another floor. Thankfully, similarly to the little mine pit areas with the bridges in the underground mine, basically every normal floor transitions into the next one with an exterior area you can stand still to take a save break in, heal up, all that jazz, so make sure to do that. With that said, there's a lot of enemies here, so I'm going to be doing my best to grind them in a way that you can easily follow. I do show my notebook basically every time I've maxed one of them out though, so keep that in mind. Thankfully, despite the relative length of this place, it still has relatively small floors like the other dungeons in the game. It's pretty hard, I find, to get lost in the Tower of Darm, barring like 2 floors in particular, and even then it's only really for like 5 minutes at a time just because of those floors' specific gimmicks. Early on, there are a couple of times where you have multiple stairways you can go along, though. In fact, there's one case right here where you can come up here to the 6th floor and go get some items, but also you can just ignore that and move on to get some other stuff. In fact, I think the treasure chest in this particular area is already technically opened, because I believe what's in there is, it's either the large shield or the reflex armor, one of those two things. And you might be thinking, huh, that's 2 of the level 3, like, equipment items we can find and just chests in here. That's a little weird, right? Yeah, again, there's a reason for it. We'll talk more about that next time, though. I should note, though, I do believe the Acumates in this particular case are only found in this room throughout the entirety of Darm Tower, so kill them all now. By and large, if an enemy is usually found on only a couple of floors, their bestiary entry will note that. So if you're trying to 100% that particular part of the game, it's pretty easy to figure out where enemies in Darm Tower are located on the whole. But with that, I'm going to need to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching, and in Part 7, we're going to go real hard in exploring the latter floors of Darm Tower and get a majority of the way through it in the process. See you guys then.